I don't know where they are. Andy's got them.
Oh, he's got them.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's stand as we sing In the Garden. I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on mine ear, the Son of God discloses, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Okay, now I've got my hearing aids on, and I can't hear one of you. I'm going to turn mine down, you turn yours up, and let's sing louder, okay? He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet, the birds hear their singing, and the melody that he gives to me within my heart is ringing, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. I stay in the garden with him, though the night around me is falling, but he bids me go through the voice of woe. His voice to me is calling, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Tell us I'm glad you see them.
Glad to see you. It's a rowdy bunch. A rowdy bunch. Well, good evening. It's good to see you all. I'm a little disappointed. I thought y'all were singing that just for me as I open the door, as I come to the garden alone. I'm thinking, well, I know I'm late, but that's... but it's good to see you all tonight. Had a great afternoon session. We had 22 today in our early session, so 3 preachers there. So that Pastor Tim and Brother Henry and myself. So we got everything covered and then some. So anyway, but it is good to see. If you have your Bible, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 17 tonight. I'd like to invite you to read with us. We're going to begin our reading in the 18th verse. Matthew chapter 17 and verse 18. And verse 18 begins, and Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him. And the child was cured from that very hour. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not cast it out? So Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief. For assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. And nothing will be impossible for you. Well, to be honest with you, I wanted to just use verse 20 for our thoughts together tonight. It's one of my favorite verses because, songs like Little is Much when God is in it, it reminds us that just a little bit of faith makes a great deal of difference. But it's such a powerful message tonight that Jesus shared not only with those disciples, but with us. And it reminds us about the importance of our faith, how big our faith is, how much we can do because we are believers and because we have faith in God's power. And I really like that passage where it says, and you can say to this mountain, be removed, and it will move. That's awesome to me. And it reminds me that, well, if I put my faith and trust in God, if I believe His Word, if my faith is constant, then I really won't be nearly as prone to those peaks and valleys in my spiritual walk. Do y'all have those peaks and valleys? I mean, days that you're here and days that you're here and days that you're here. Wouldn't it be better if we could just kind of stay on that plateau where our faith is strong and our walk with the Lord is consistent and we're trusting and we're believing and we're hoping and we're just walking with God day in and day out in our lives? I love the peaks, but man, I hate those valleys. Those times in life when things get a little difficult and I'm feeling a little low and, I get there's a lot of sickness running around right now. Y'all ever get a terrible case of the poor old me's? I mean, those things can be terminal, you can kind of focus on that and how bad it is and how things are never good and things don't ever work out right and all those kind of things. And you can stay with the poor old me's long enough that you can just about kill yourself spiritually. But if we're reminded that God is still there, if we're reminded that the power of God is still available and God hasn't stopped working and God hasn't stopped blessing and God hasn't stopped moving. Let me remind you tonight what brought us to the passage that we read from. Jesus and His disciples have just come down from the mountain of Transfiguration. They've encountered an amazing experience there on that mountaintop. They've seen things that were amazing to them, things they never envisioned. They come down from the mountaintop and they're met by a crowd of people, and the people are doing what people have always done. Every time Jesus went anywhere, it was the same process. They would crowd around. All of them were asking for something, hoping for something. They wanted to hear the teaching, but they wanted to receive the blessing, either healing or food or something in their lives. And as was the norm, one man steps out and he kneels down in Jesus' presence and he pleads for the healing of his son. Apparently, from theologians and church historians, from the description that we have recorded, more than likely the young man had epilepsy. He would cast himself into fires and all those kind of things, couldn't control his body. And so Jesus says to him, that's not a problem. And He heals the young man. And it's a great thing for people to see. Now, here's the kicker. Verse 16. So I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't cure him. We sort of skim over that and move on to the great deeds and the words of Jesus, and they bring him out, and the demon is gone, and we look at that and think, man, that's awesome, great job. He did it again. Just an amazing thing that God does for His believers. But the story isn't over. Because verse 16 says, well, we brought him to your disciples and they couldn't help. And then this man makes this great projection and he talks about what has happened and how bad things were. And there's one thing that you and I have in common today, and that is that we all have felt like failures. Jesus' disciples felt like failures. We couldn't do anything. We couldn't help. We couldn't cast out the demon. So tonight I want to try to look with you at this passage, and I want to offer you 4 steps that are mentioned here that move you from being overwhelmed with life and being burdened and feeling like a failure to moving on to the next thing in your life. I really thought about naming this message tonight, you failed. So what? Who hasn't? Only people that never fail are people who never do anything. And so what we learn from the disciples is sometimes it's okay to fail, but hopefully you learn from your failure and you grow in your spiritual walk and you understand more about who God is. So let me give you these 4 steps rather quickly this evening, because I think they'll help us as we progress in our spiritual journey with Christ. Step number 1 is this. It begins with an embarrassing admission. Why couldn't we cast out that demon? Now, regardless of what your failure is or was in your life, the road to recovery always begins right there with an admission, with a confession. I have failed. There's something I didn't get right, something I didn't do right, something that was not supposed to be in my life. Now, something that always interested me and intrigued me about this is when the man takes his son to the disciples, I wonder when that was. Obviously, it was not this particular day because they've been up on the mountain of transfiguration. So somewhere between the time before they went up and this particular moment, this man carried his son to the disciples and they couldn't help. And I began to wonder, what would I have done if I had been one of those disciples and tried to answer that question? Why couldn't they help? I would have looked at Jesus more than likely and said something like this. Well, yeah, we failed, but that was before we knew what we know now. That was before we saw what we saw on the mountain of transfiguration. What did they see? They saw the face of Jesus begin to glow. His clothes were white in appearance. Moses and Elijah come down and they have this little conversation with them. And so the disciples are saying, man, we've experienced an amazing thing. If we had had that before this man brought his kid, we could have done great things ourselves. But the truth of the matter is we are all prone to hide behind excuses. Everything that we do, everything that we don't do, we have a good justification for why that has happened in our lives. Let me give you a couple of illustrations. How many of you grew up in a dysfunctional family? It is amazing how much of the world blame, well, I'm this way because I grew up in a dysfunctional family. We've kind of laughed about that in our family. When our kids were first born, I prayed for, I kept thinking and hoping, man, I wish the hospital had sent a book home with us to tell us what to do when that happens. How do you handle this when it goes on? We just did the best that we could with what we knew. But we got an excuse. My parents were abusive. Well, my parents weren't abusive. But my father did on numerous occasions apply the Board of Education to the seat of knowledge. And I learned a lot. And folks, I can promise you it was not my personality that was warped. Well, it's the church's fault. The reason the world's in the mess it is because the church is in the mess she's in. Or maybe it's just society in general. You know, we're living in such a dark world where anything and everything goes. That's why everything is so messed up. And we complain about what everybody else is not doing. And we complain about what everybody else is doing. When the truth is, we fail because our faith wavers. We're not what we ought to be, what we could be, what we know we need to be, because our faith isn't strong enough for us to do that. And the road that leads us from failure to hope and from defeat to success begins with confessing our own sin. This is the thing that's wrong in my life. This is what I need to work on. God, it's embarrassing for me to admit, but I've got some things that I need for you to take from me and some things that I need for you to strengthen in my own life. And that's hard to say. Number 2, there is an humble inquiry. In verse 19, the disciples are asking, why couldn't we do that? I hear honesty in that question. Lord, we did everything that we know to do. We did what you taught us, but nothing seemed to work. We prayed like you taught us. We laid hands on him. We anointed him. What did we do wrong? Why didn't it work? Now, I would venture to say tonight, not many of us are willing to take that step because usually we know why our faith is weak. We know what's wrong in our lives. Seldom do we ever go to God and say, now I know I'm walking with you and I am obedient and I am faithful and I'm doing as much as I can possibly do and I'm holding on to everything I can hold on to. God, I put all of my sin in your hand. I'm confessing that. I'm giving it up. I'm walking holy and righteously with you every day of my life. Most of the time, that's not our prayer. Instead, if you listen as we talk about our lives, we say things like this. Well, I know I'm wrong. What's the next word? But. Translation, I'm going to do it anyway. I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Folks, that's the fancy way of saying, I don't care what God thinks. I don't care what anybody else thinks. It's my life, and I'm going to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, and how I want to do it. Or we say something like this, God, I'm really trying to live for you. Are you? I mean, is that your number one goal and ambition in life, that you are really trying to live every moment of every day for Him? I think we need to learn to look at ourselves honestly. What is it that's in our lives that hinders us in our walk with God? God, what are you calling me to do that I haven't done? What sin am I holding on to and afraid to give up or unwilling to give up, even though I know it cost me in my relationship with you? And basically, all I'm saying tonight is, folks, unless we are honest, we are going to persistently wallow in failure. We're going to fall short of God's expectation and of our goal and of our potential in being God's children. Number 3, this one hurts. Be prepared for an awful confrontation. Now, let me paraphrase verse 20 for you. Jesus said, all right, you asked for it. You want to know why you failed? Because you don't have enough faith. Your faith was weak. I read that and think, man, he put it straightforward and right to the point. But when you read the story of Jesus' interaction with people, you'll discover he always speaks the truth. If you ask him, Lord, what's in my life that shouldn't be there? What is there about my walk with you that is lacking? Be prepared to hear the truth. He's going to show you what's wrong in your life. And I think that's awesome because I've learned over the years, the only people who will ever really tell you the truth are people who love you. I mean, everybody else will tell you what they think you want to hear. They'll tell you all these good things about life and about you and everything else. But people who love you will be honest with you. They will tell you the truth. Let me tell you one of the funniest things that ever happens to me. Now, it hadn't happened here at Holly Springs yet. It probably will, but it hadn't happened yet. Sunday morning, my wife and I always go to the front door to greet people. It gives me a chance to interact with visitors and to greet some of you folks. And randomly, on occasions, I'll have people walk out, take me by the hand and say, "Preacher, that's the best sermon I ever heard." Now, what makes that funny is because I'm standing right there and I'm looking out into your faces. And the person that just said, "That's the best sermon I ever heard," about the third verse of the second song, they were asleep, didn't wake up till the last prayer. I mean, that's just real. People that love you will tell you the truth. because they're concerned enough about your life and about where you are and what you're doing that they want you to improve. They want you to draw closer to God. If you have a desire to be more like Jesus and to be used more for Jesus, then ask Him to show you, Lord, what's missing? What am I lacking? What am I holding on to that I need to let go of so that you can work through me better and stronger and more powerfully than ever before? But let me caution you, when you ask, be prepared to hear the truth. He's going to tell you the truth. Number 4, catches most of us off guard. In order to turn failure into hope, be prepared to deal with an awesome problem. Problem? What is the problem in verse 20? He says to them there, because of your unbelief, I surely say to you that if you have the faith as a grain of mustard seed, say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Wouldn't that be a great problem to have? I mean, I have enough relationship with God, enough power with God that He moves literally mountains out of my life. He moves distress and sorrow and fear and anxiety and all those things that we carry around with us. At His word, those things move. How can that be? Because the voice behind those words is the voice that spoke into existence this world and everything that's here. It is the voice of God Himself who controls and watches over and maneuvers through life and through our obstacles. Faith that overcomes circumstances. In fact, Jesus says here, nothing will be impossible for you. I was telling the earlier service at Mount Lebanon, a year or two after we first arrived there, we decided to go through some renovation for our church facilities. I kind of laugh. Do y'all remember the 1970s orange and brown and gold tweed carpet? That's what we had. And you know that old carpet, if you pick it, it doesn't just pick a little place. I mean, it'll pull out of there like hair falling off. And so we had some pulls from the pulpit all the way out and down this way and around here. And we had a very unique and engineering custodian there. And she found some brown masking tape that she could tape all of that stuff down. It was very appealing to visitors. And so we decided we were going to do this building program. We got estimates and got everything in place and discovered it was a little over $500,000. And we began to think about what we were doing. And some of the deacons said to me, well, you know, Pastor, we're meeting our budget, but we're not exceeding it very much. So I came up with this idea, and I asked our deacons to take turns rotating on any given Sunday morning and to stand up and talk about the new building program. And the first week, one of the youngest deacons that I had at that time got up, and he said, folks, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we have found all the money that we need for our building program. The bad news is it's in your pocket. And we got to thinking, how in the world are we going to pay for this stuff? Well, several months later, close to Christmas, there was a gentleman in the church family, hadn't been there very long. He called me and he said, Pastor, is the church office closed? I think it was like December 30th. I said, yes, sir, it's closed till the end of the year, and we'll be back open January the 2nd after New Year's Day. And he said, well, I've got a little bit of money I wanted to donate to the church. I've got some interest off of some of my investments, but I really need it to be submitted to the church so I can get the receipt dated this year. And I said, I don't think that'll be a problem. So I called our secretary and asked her, would she run down and receipt the money? She said, yeah, I'd love to. It's only a couple minutes drive. And I'm thinking $500, $1,000 would be a great start. Well, after he had finished his business with her, he went home, and as soon as he got out of the parking lot, she called me. She said, do you know how much money he gave the church? I said, I don't have any idea. She said, it was just a little bit over $100,000. Because we didn't have a money problem. We had a faith problem. We had a 30-year loan on that mortgage. We paid it off in 7 years. You see, it's a God thing. Jesus said you can move mountains if you believe. But this kind of faith comes only by, do you remember those two words he used? Fasting and prayer. Now, we're Southern Baptists. We believe in feasting and prayer. But there's something about fasting that puts your heart and your mind and refocuses your attention on things that are important. But it grows your faith. It helps you see that God is in charge. The story here quickly moves from failure to the next need the disciples are going to have. Jesus taught them what they needed to know. He dealt with their failure. He told them why things didn't work out like they thought and wanted them to work out. And then he goes on to talk about his coming death, and these things are going to be happening. So I want you guys to be ready, and I want you to be prepared that your faith doesn't waver when those dark moments come in your life. And the point of all that was simply this: he didn't want them dwelling on their failure. He didn't want them living in the past and embarrassed. Yeah, I wonder when this gentleman brought his son forward and with all the crowd gathered around there, I've got this feeling that he spoke loudly enough for everybody in the crowd to hear. We brought him to your disciples. They couldn't help. Can you imagine how embarrassed they were? Well, people are going to talk about us. I'll never try to do anything else. I'll just sit in church and be a wallflower. Jesus said, that's not why I called you. I don't want you just to sit. Yeah, you failed, but what did you learn? Now take what you learned and use it and do something better, something more powerful, more effective the next opportunity that you have. I'm going away. And you guys are going to have to be firm in your faith and believe what you say you believe and let that carry you day after day. But folks, if you don't learn from your failure, your faith doesn't grow. And if you don't fail from time to time, you get this impression that you've done something. And folks, we hadn't done anything. We just allowed God to use our vessel. And God has worked in us and through us and for us to accomplish amazing things for His purpose. One of the great failures that we all have in life is failing. Doesn't bother me if I fail for Him. At least I tried. Not a word of condemnation to the disciples from Jesus. There was no "I told you so" from Jesus. He just points out, guys, if you're going to do this kind of stuff, you got to stay with me, you got to stay in the Word, you got to grow your faith, you got to be committed to this on a daily basis. Now, I'm not really sure when the majority of people who call themselves Christians bought into this idea that being a Christian was just for Sunday. Because it's a whole lot more for those other 6 days a week than it is for Sunday morning. We do on Sunday morning what the world expects us to do. But they don't expect us to be the hands and the feet and the voice of God any other day. One last story I'll close with. Shortly after our son was born, we discovered that he had a problem with his digestive system. He couldn't process whole milk and he couldn't drink formula. Everything that he ate made him green. He was so sick with that projectile vomiting. Carried him back to his pediatrician, and the pediatrician gave us a name of a formula that he said, let's try this. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's a formula called Nutramigen. Comes in a little can about this big, about that big around. At that time, it was $25 a can. He drank a can every day and a half. I was making $14,000 a year total package. And my wife and I looked at each other and said, we're going to have to take him back. We can't afford him. He was about 4 months old. Let's see, August. 3 months old. The pianist at our church there was a bachelor. Was a professor at the William & Mary University. Didn't teach students, he taught teachers. Very intelligent gentleman. He came over to our house a little bit after Halloween. He came in, knocked on our front door, came in, and we talked a little while, and he said, well, I hadn't got but a minute. I got to run home. I've got some sweet potato rolls in the oven that I'm going to bring to you as soon as they get done. And folks, if you had never eaten sweet potato yeast rolls, oh my word, you missed a treat. He said, but I want to run over before they got done because I got something I want to give you. I'm a bachelor, and I never thought that I would ever have the privilege to buy baby formula. But he handed me $500, and he said, I want to buy your son's formula for the next month. Just be in the hands and feet of Jesus to his pastor. Stepping out in faith, encouraging us. Folks, if we're going to be the church, if we're going to be the arms and the hands and the mouth and the eyes of Jesus, we've got to have faith that God's going to bless and use what we give him in ways that we never dreamed possible. We make a difference. And I promise you, you're going to get some criticism. I can tolerate that. What I have difficulty with is standing before my Heavenly Father one day and have him ask the question, what did you do with the opportunities and the gifts that I gave you? Did you use them for my glory? Did you grow my kingdom? Folks, we need to try. You realize Jesus never told us to be successful. He just said go and try. And if you'll go, I promise you, he'll take your effort and use it in ways you never dreamed possible. As I mentioned, I thought seriously about renaming my message tonight, You Failed. So what? We all have some failures. But folks, I'd rather fail for Jesus than succeed in anything else in my life. Because what we do for him is eternal. And it makes an eternal difference. Don't quit trying. Pray with me. Lord, tonight I thank you that you have brought us to this place, that you've given us an opportunity to worship together. And Lord, I ask now as we prepare to go through our prayer time and to pray for our brothers, our sisters, our community, that God, we also pray for ourselves and for this church family and for our place, for our own calling, for our own commitment to the kingdom of God. Help us, Lord, to be faithful, to have faith to believe that if you send us, you'll prepare us, you'll provide for us, and that you will bring great results because we have been faithful to your calling. So, Lord, tonight I pray your blessings upon us. Use us for your service. All that we do this week, Lord, may it bring glory to you. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good evening. Any praise reports?